Another year, another iPad, and suddenly your seemingly new-ish iPad Air doesn't seem so new anymore. So let's go ahead and find out what exactly Apple's new iPad Air 2 offers over its predecessor. Hey guys, Jonathan here with TLD. Hope you guys are doing well. And as most of you are probably aware, Apple's new iPad Air 2 is out. And now that I've had some time to play with it, I want to break down the major differences between it and the first generation iPad Air and ultimately help you decide if it's worth the upgrade. So I think it'll be easiest just to go down the list of everything that is different about the iPad Air 2, which, like most Apple products, is thinner and lighter. The iPad Air 2 is now 6.1 millimeters thin as opposed to the 7.5 on the original, and it now weighs in at just under a pound, whereas the iPad Air 1 was 1 pound exactly. So in terms of screen size and resolution, the iPad Air 2 is exactly the same as the iPad Air 1, 9.7 inches, 2048 by 1536, but in terms of what's new, the iPad Air 2 features an optically bonded display with anti-reflective coating. As far as what that means in English, it's going to enhance your viewing experience because obviously there's going to be less glare and better viewing angles, and it's really hard to kind of portray that through video. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but if you get a chance to compare the two in person, if you look towards the corner, you can see where there's a separation, and I really didn't notice that before, but once you get a hold of the new iPad Air 2, it's pretty obvious and it is a pretty substantial difference. Now that doesn't mean that the iPad Air 2 is going to be 100% glare free, but it does do a pretty good job at reducing glare, and is definitely noticeable side by side against the original. Now, is this feature alone worth upgrading? And I'd say not necessarily, but if you're coming from anything prior to the first generation iPad Air or buying an iPad for the first time, it's definitely a welcomed addition. So we've talked about some of the aesthetics and how the iPad Air 2 differs from the original, but now let's talk about some things that you can't see, and those are the big performance boosts underneath the hood. The iPad Air 2 has an A8X tri-core CPU clocked at 1.5 GHz compared to the A7 dual-core at 1.4 GHz on the original iPad Air. We now see 2 GB of RAM as opposed to the 1 on the original iPad Air. And the M7 Motion coprocessor has been bumped up to an M8. So what does that mean in terms of actual performance, and what does that extra core do? In Geekbench 3, the iPad Air 2 had a single core score of 1813 compared to 1112 on the original iPad Air. That is pretty substantial in terms of generation to generation as far as single core scores go. But jumping over to multi-core, you can see there's actually even a bigger difference with the iPad Air 2 scoring in at 4514 compared to the 2098 on the original iPad Air, so huge difference. As far as graphics go, in the Antutu 3D rating benchmark, the iPad Air 2 was getting around 60 frames per second on average, whereas the original iPad Air 2 was getting just around 25, a little under 26 average frames per second. Now, if you happen to catch my iPad Air 2 unboxing with Marquez, Austin, and Judner, we all seem to agree that as far as Touch ID on a tablet or an iPad, it's a little limited with iOS and not so important. Until Apple starts to implement things like separate user profiles where you can then log in with your thumbprint, that's going to be where it's cool. But for now, it's definitely more of a convenience as opposed to a necessity. If you own an iPhone 5S, 6, or 6 Plus and you jump to an iPad without Touch ID, then it might make sense. But really, again, it's about convenience in terms of just unlocking your iPad or making purchases by unlocking it with your thumbprint. Now, it is not a secret that I am not a huge fan of taking photos on a tablet. It just doesn't look right, but Apple has updated the camera on the iPad Air 2. The front-facing camera is pretty much the same, but what you need to know is the iPad Air 2 now has an 8 megapixel camera and slow motion video, whereas the original iPad Air had a 5 megapixel camera and no slow motion video. Here's a few shots between the two, and yes, I am out there in public taking pictures with not one iPad, but 2 iPads, so you guys can just picture the visual on that. Video quality is a little better, a little less noisy on the iPad Air 2 as opposed to the original iPad Air, but again, one of the big differences between the two is the iPad Air 2 offers slow motion video where you cannot get that on the original iPad Air. So those are pretty much the main differences between the two. I think it's ultimately going to come down to whether or not all those things add up and are a worthy upgrade for you. For most people, I think you'll be perfectly content with your current iPad Air, but if you've watched this video and there's enough compelling reasons to upgrade, I think you'll be happy as well. Obviously, if you're coming from anything prior to the original iPad Air, I think it's going to be a huge upgrade and well worth the money, because to me, the combo of the super insanely fast processor, the optically bonded display, which looks fantastic, it makes the iPad Air 2 a really solid choice. Now before I hop out of here, I want to give a huge thank you to Hulu Plus for help making this video possible. I know most of you know what Hulu is, but Hulu Plus is essentially like that speed bump on the new iPad Air 2. You can watch entire seasons of shows like South Park and Family Guy. Now me and my fiance use Hulu Plus to catch up on Once Upon a Time. We have crazy schedules, so we don't always get to watch it when we want to, so being able to have it on demand with Hulu Plus is awesome. Hulu Plus streams on just about every device you own, plus if you're an iPhone user, they just released a beautiful new app to enhance your viewing experience. Now Hulu Plus is only $7.99 a month, but for TLD fans, you guys can get a free extended 2-week trial by heading over to huluplus.com/TLD. So by using that link, you can help the channel out and get an awesome deal at the same time. Aside from that, this is Jonathan with TLD, and I will see you guys later.